Hi, welcome to the Israel First television program with myself, Martin Blackham. Natalie says hello to you. She's behind the scenes today. Sometimes, you know, in the program we have historical events, and today it's really a very important event in history that we're going to be looking at for Israel, and it's the Operation Jonathan, the most daring rescue attempt in history. This is the Watch Jerusalem. And if I can get that on the camera and talk about it, we have in the studio Iddo Netanyahu. Thank you so much, Iddo, for coming in today, giving us your time.
Glad to be here.
Appreciate that. And it says in the interview, it says in the news article, Operation Jonathan, it says the most daring rescue attempt in history. An inspiring lesson from refusing to compromise with evil. Operation Entebbe took place in southern Uganda on the 4th of July 1976. It has been called a defining moment in the war on terror and has inspired more than a dozen documentaries and feature films, including the recent 7 Days in Entebbe, Operation Thunderbolt, Victory at Entebbe, as well as a number of books, including Yoni's Last Battle, and that's the book we're going to be looking at today. And what makes Yoni's Last Battle different is it's written by Iddo Netanyahu, who is the brother of the commander of the operation, Yoni Netanyahu, and you've done interviews with members of the unit that was involved and other participants. So that's what makes this book very special and different from all the other books. And Dr. Iddo Netanyahu, he's an Israeli physician, he's an author and playwright. He's the younger brother of Benjamin Netanyahu, the current prime minister, and Yonatan Netanyahu, who was sadly killed in Operation Thunderbolt at Entebbe. So we really appreciate you coming, giving us your wisdom, telling us all about the story, something very historical that you're involved with, that you become part of history, really. So tell us, Iddo, why did you write the book Yoni's Last Battle?
I wrote the book for two reasons. First of all, I wanted to research the raid because there was no real documentation of what happened in the raid, except for erroneous documentation that we won't go into it, but whoever relied on this erroneous documentation of the Israeli army made a mistake, whether it's the other books that were written, whether it's documentaries, and certainly the various Hollywood movies, they're meaningless. Okay, it's not the facts. So there was a need to document the facts as they really occurred. And certainly Yoni's role, okay. And being a member of the unit myself, I had served in that same unit. I knew many of the people. I was actually their part-time commander, some of them, okay. I had access to these people. It was a secret unit. Normally they did not interview, but they did interview with me. And so first of all, I got down the facts of the raid and I was able to write a book, eventually, that was based on actual real facts. And if I may say so, this is the only factual book about the raid so far. I hope there'll be others. And then I said, you know what, it's not enough that I just get the facts and document them, record them. I think the story, it's an amazing story. It's an amazing story, first of all, about the power of what a society can do, okay? Not just what the unit can do, but this was a decision, well, first of all, the soldiers had to be able to say, okay, I might die. The officers, the chief of staff, who would be risking his career, certainly he would be, if the operation would fail, he'd be the first one to pay the price. And then the government, the Rabin, the head of the Israeli government, told the cabinet that if this operation fails, they will resign, the government will resign, he will resign as prime minister. But we felt it was necessary to take this risk and not to succumb to to these murderers, basically. And I would say it's a way of really, nowadays, to show the West what needs to be done. Okay, the West that is daily succumbing to forces that want to destroy it. Well, Israel is not allowing this to happen nowadays, and it certainly did not allow it to happen when we decided on this operation. So it's a kind of, I would say, an example to the world of not only how to fight terrorism, but I would say of how to survive, how a free society can and should survive. This operation hinges on what happens in a critical, I would say, 60 seconds. from the time they discover you to the time you kill. And that's one of the reasons I wrote the book.
And if you'd like to get hold of the book, you can get it on Amazon. It's an amazing book, Iddo, because it not just goes through all the story, but it's got illustrations, you've got photographs in the book, and it's also got an amazing, the illustrations of the actual operation itself. So get hold of that book. I know that you're really going to enjoy it. Just to give us a bit of background to the whole story, maybe you can explain a bit. There was a hijacking of an Air France jet which had flown originally from Tel Aviv, but it was on the way to Greece, was it, I think? Or?
It was on the way to Paris,
and
it stopped over in Greece, and
right.
That's where the terrorists got on. And shortly after took off from Athens, they hijacked the plane. They first landed it in Libya, and from Libya they took off and they landed it eventually. Nobody knew where it was going. They landed it at Uganda, Entebbe airport in Uganda, on the northern shore of Lake Victoria. And as it turned out, we didn't know that at the time, Idi Amin was the dictator of Uganda and his army were fully cooperating with the terrorists.
And at the time, this was huge news in Israel. This was the big story.
That was on everybody's mind,
right.
Of course, because they demanded, these were a combined effort of Palestinian and German terrorists, members of the Baader Meinhof group, if you remember, and the Palestinian terrorists, and they demanded the release of many terrorists.
Now, was this before Munich or after? With the timeline, I can't quite remember.
I'm pretty certain it was after Munich.
It was after Munich.
Oh, yeah.
So the record of the terrorists with hostages wasn't good, with Israeli hostages. So there was a lot of fear and concern in the country. The atmosphere was pretty bad, I guess.
No, there was no question that if you don't accede to the terrorist demands, these 100 and some hostages will be killed. Now, what happened is after 2 or 3 days, the non-Israeli and non-Jewish hostages were let go.
Right.
They were released to France. And the people who remained were Israelis, some non-Israelis who were clearly Jewish, that is, they had a Jewish garb, beards or whatever, and also the Air France crew. The pilot, a very courageous man, refused to be released without all the passengers being released. And he persuaded the crew also not to fly back to France. So there were remained there 106 hostages stranded, guarded at the airport in Uganda. It's what's called the Old Terminal Building, an abandoned terminal. And that was the situation. And
so this was huge because so you not only had a hostage situation because there have been previous ones, which your brother had been involved with, Bibi been involved with. I believe there was a hostage situation with a Belgium airline in Lod. So there've been previous hostage situations, but the difference with this was now it was in Africa, thousands of miles away from Israel.
The terrorists were certain that they are not vulnerable to anything. Who would think of launching a strike in the middle of a foreign country, enemy country?
It had never been done before.
Thousands of miles away.
It had never been done before.
Not that I know. Well, it was done. Look, it was the famous rescue of Mussolini by the Germans, but not on this scale. 106 hostages. How will you get there? How will you take them out? Planning was started from the beginning. They were thinking about ideas, but the truth is that they couldn't really plan anything up until Thursday. The plane was hijacked on Sunday. Up until Thursday, because there was no real information about what's going on at Entebbe, at the airport. But once the foreign passengers were released, that is the non-Israelis, and landed in Paris, finally we could get some information. We sent people over to Paris to interview them, and you needed to know, you couldn't plan anything.
Right.
You needed to know, where are the hostages? Where are they located? We knew that they were in this old terminal building, which is a huge complex, but where?
Right.
Every second here counts. Once the terrorists understand that there's a rescue attempt, well, they can slaughter the hostages within seconds.
Right.
So timing here is of great importance, and surprises of great importance. You need to know exactly where they are.
And at the same time, there was also the government of Israel was also which is, I think it's even against policy, but we're also thinking of discussing the matter with the terrorists, or there was some sort of
More than discussing,
concessions?
on Thursday noon,
Right.
since there was no viable military option, the government at that time, it was the first government of Yitzhak Rabin, the defense minister was Shimon Peres. The government unanimously decided that they will negotiate with the terrorists and give in to their demands. This was totally against Israeli policy, but that was the decision they made. They did not want to sacrifice 100 and some lives for this principle. The Israeli government made an official decision to negotiate with the terrorists. They sent one of the ministers or aides to the minister to Paris to negotiate, to commence negotiations. But at the same time, the army started to understand that there was a realistic option for planning an operation.
Oh.
And so Thursday afternoon, a decision was made in the army that, okay, we'll start planning something realistic for Saturday night, because the ultimatum of the terrorists was about to expire Sunday. And so they had very little time. And my brother received the order to plan his part of the operation Thursday evening. No, not before
Wow.
that. Thursday evening, he has to plan the operation. He has to train his men on Friday. They have to do rehearsals. Saturday morning, they're already going to the airport and starting to fly off to Africa. Very quick. And that's also very unique about this operation. How did they plan? And how did they rehearse? How did they execute this thing when there's so little time? It's really a tremendous, I would say, example of the power of will, that you say, okay, I got to do this, and we'll do it no matter what. And it's a very interesting story, how it was planned so quickly during the night, how the information was, how the planning was done simultaneous with information coming in, streaming in from Paris. From the interviews of the hostages, how all this was put together during the night and then rehearsed during Friday.
So they had a
during Friday, even during the rehearsal, they had to make changes. He had to make changes in the plan because new information was coming in. They started to realize things they didn't know before.
And do you think a lot of this, and we're talking about Yoni's last battle, do you think a lot of this was due to your brother, that he was, as well as being very focused and in order, that he was somebody who made things happen? That he was someone able to take a situation, however...
Obviously he was able to do it. Whether there would have been another commander of the unit at that time, had he done as good a job or even a better job or worse job, who knows? I have no idea.
Right.
But certainly, being the commander of the unit, he was responsible for all of this. And he did a fantastic job. Look, the truth is, and I know this from having served in the unit, serving under him also, by the way, not in those years, but years before, several years before. Nobody that I know, that I interviewed in the unit, of all the men who participated, and I interviewed many of them, actually believed that this operation will take place.
Okay.
But the working sort of, I would say, the modus operandi that my brother instilled in them is, okay, we're doing this, we're planning, we're rehearsing, and it's going to happen. Whether he believed it or not, I have no idea. But he gave the impression that, yes, this will happen.
Right, because
if we want it, it'll happen.
Right, because the situation was that it was being considered, but only as a consideration. It was not authorized. It had to be authorized by, I guess, the government, the cabinet.
Well, the final decision, of course, has to be of the government, the full cabinet. Rabin, we'll talk about that in a minute. But certainly in the unit, this caused a lot of problems. The fact that it was planned so quickly that the rehearsals were done, just a few rehearsals during Friday, and a rehearsal Friday night, which the chief of staff came to see, caused tremendous, I would say, discomfort among some young officers in the unit who were, going to risk their lives and that of their men. And because in the unit, what you're used to is operations that are being planned and rehearsed for months, sometimes not weeks, months. And here they get something, they have to plan it in a few hours, rehearse it during the day, and the following day, that's it. Uh, and they were amazed that the chief of staff, at the end of the nighttime rehearsal on Friday, told Yoni and the other officers, the commanders of all units who participated in the operation, told them, okay, I'm going to recommend this to the defense minister and to the prime minister. They found this out Friday night, late at night, after midnight, and started talking among themselves, talking about 3 or 4 officers, crucial officers to the success of this raid, who said, this will fail. This will end in total disaster, not just for us, but for Israel. And so they planned to send, they persuaded one of these officers, who was the son of a minister in the government, to go home, even though Yoni did not allow anybody to leave the unit for security reasons, to go home and tell his father what the real situation is, that this will be a failure. And that he will speak to Rabin, and of course, had he done so, probably the operation would not have happened. He started going, he left the unit. He started going, traveling at night, 2, 3 o'clock a.m. to his home, where his father was, and then decided to turn around. He didn't go through with it, thank God. And, but that atmosphere of uncertainty, Yoni found out about it. He didn't know what happened with the father, but he found out about this unease Saturday morning, and he gathered them together, and he was able to change their mood completely. And when they took off on the planes, all of them say the atmosphere was very good. They felt confident they could do this, although they still did not think the government would approve. Okay.
And so the government had to make a decision. The government of Israel the cabinet had to meet, and they gave the green light?
Yes, the government got together Saturday noontime, around the time that the planes already needed to leave to stop over. At that time, Sharm el-Sheikh and the southern tip of the Sinai was still ours. They had to go there to refuel. And the government was still in session.
Now,
and the government was in session for hours.
Wow.
It was a very difficult decision to make. They stopped over, they flew to the Sinai, they flew to Sharm el-Sheikh. They stopped over, and then they also had to take off from Sharm el-Sheikh. The government yet did not decide.
And I think we just should point out that, what was going through their minds was that there could be a total disaster. They could not only lose all the hostages, but they could also lose all the soldiers at the same time.
Absolutely. My brother Yoni met with the defense minister, Shimon Peres, during Friday afternoon. He called him for a one-on-one meeting. Very strange for a defense minister to call a lieutenant colonel for just a one-on-one meeting. And he did it, I imagine, because he wanted his true opinion. He didn't want him to be pressured by any higher-ups, whether chief of staff or anybody else. And he called him to his office. Yoni went to Tel Aviv, to the Kiryah, and he was seen there by people have said that this meeting never happened. Well, it did happen. There are many witnesses, not many, but there are witnesses to this meeting, including, of course, the Minister of Defense. And he wanted to ask him, can this thing be done? And Yoni assured him that it will be done with little cost. He did not think it'll cost in terms of the cost to the hostages. He wasn't so sure about his men. That was a different matter. But you're soldiers. You have to risk it.
Right.
You have to take the risk, and if you know, this is what you're there for.
And this is different from other operations because, other military operations, because in a military operation you're against another combatant or soldier, but in this particular instance you've got hostages and you've got to be careful with crossfire and things like that. And
I would say it's very different from a regular military operation.
Right.
Any hostage release rescue operation is different, inherently different, because when you, as a soldier, let's say, go into a room, okay, you first throw in hand grenades or whatever. You try to kill as many of the enemy inside the room, even before you enter. And when you enter, you just indiscriminately shoot at whoever is there. You don't risk your life. You risk your life, of course, but you try to minimize the risk. A hostage release operation is totally different. You enter the room, and there you have to find out who is enemy and who is friend, who is a hostage and who is the terrorist. That is, It takes you a few seconds, and in those seconds, you're a sitting target. The terrorists are there, and they'll shoot you. They'll kill you. It takes tremendous courage to go into these rooms, and it takes, well, the soldiers, they didn't do it properly. They did not do it properly in some other Husky rescue operations. In Israel, everybody remembered Ma'alot. Ma'alot was an operation also done by the same unit, where I think 35 children got killed.
Right.
Slaughtered by
in
the terrorists.
South. Yeah,
until the members of the unit actually even reached the room. And this was in the memory of everybody.
Right.
I think also in the memory of those officers who were very much hesitant about.
So they thought it could be a repeat.
They were certain that it would be a disaster.
Right.
Yeah. And there were many more hostages there than in Ma'alot. We're talking about more than 100 hostages. And the unit was still not sure where they were, by the way. They could have been in one of two rooms, because initially the hostages had been divided into two halls next to each other. And that's the latest information we had. Now, they assumed that most of them will be probably, after they released 150 hostages, that the remaining ones will be put together in one hall. But we were not certain, and we assumed they could be in two halls, and that's why the Mercedes, the first car that was supposed to mimic a caravan headed by Idi Amin, the president of Uganda,
right.
That first Mercedes had two teams, one for each hall. Because that's the first car that'll go through, and
so
no matter what happens, that car has to go through and go straight to the
Right, so
halls.
Yoni was in the Mercedes car, which was taken from
Yoni
Israel.
was Idi Amin, yes.
Right, and the story, I mean, you have to get the book, because there's so much that you're not going to hear today. You're going to have to read that. But the story was that the Mercedes even had mechanical issues in Israel, and they weren't sure about it to the last minute.
You see, once again, nobody thought seriously about this operation. So when the unit contacted the Mossad to bring them one of their Mercedes, they probably gave the poorest one they had, the one that was a piece of junk, basically. Why should the Mossad give them one of the better Mercedes? That's not going to happen. So the car came to the unit Friday late morning, and they discovered that there's a gas leak. They discovered that that the fan belt is not working properly, all sorts of things. And when in the model rehearsal that the chief of staff came to see and other officers, and the Mercedes and the two Jeeps, Land Rover Jeeps, were in the Hercules. Okay, Hercules supposedly landed, opens the back door, and the driver, Yoni's driver, turns on the switch, doesn't work. Okay.
Technical problems.
Technical problems. So what they did, being Israelis, the guy hollers, the driver hollers to his friend from Na'alal in back of him who drove the Jeep. He said, "Bump me," okay? And that shook the starter.
Right.
And that caused the car to start.
Wow. That was just coming off the Hercules.
Coming off the Hercules at the model rehearsal that was supposed to determine whether there's a go or no go for this operation.
Right.
So they worked all night in repairing the starter. Okay.
Wow. And it's just amazing because the distances they had to travel, they had to come across from Israel through Africa. And by the way, there were a lot of unfriendly airspaces, never mind. I mean, there was Arab countries at the time. There was it was difficult, so they had to fly underneath the
radar. They flew very low. The problem was mostly when they flew in the Sinai, because there was tremendous turbulence when you fly so low, and the men were really exhausted, and they were vomiting, and they were sick. By the time they landed in Sharm el-Sheikh, they were all feeling terrible. And one of them actually had to stay behind. He felt so bad. Then, when they took off from Sharm el-Sheikh, they flew over the Red Sea, over the Indian Ocean, but also very low altitude, maybe 30 feet above sea level, that's all. But there it was over water, there isn't that much turbulence, and it was fine. Once they passed Arab nations, whether Saudi Arabia or Egypt, then they could go higher up, because in Africa there was no real radar at that time that could detect them.
Now, as a result of this operation, the hostages were rescued and there was and saved and brought back by the Hercules planes to Israel. And they're alive today, I guess. And do you hear what happened to them? Or
first of all, some of the hostages got killed. There were
Right.
3 who got killed in the fire exchange with the terrorists. Actually, 2 got killed, 1 got wounded, then he died in the hospital in Nairobi. There was a 4th hostage, Dora Bloch, the mother of Ilan Hartuv. They were both on their way to a wedding, I think, in Paris. She actually was in a hospital in Kampala on the night of the operation because something was wrong with her. And the following morning, Idi Amin's henchmen, he gave them the order to take her. They abducted her from the hospital and executed her. Old woman. So there were 4 hostages who died in this operation. Also, besides my brother's unit, Seir al-Matkal, which was in charge of the fighting with the Ugandan army, there was a lot of Ugandan army there, not just terrorists.
Right.
It was a very complicated operation, but the unit was in charge of fighting the terrorists and the Ugandan army, who were in the same building.
Wow.
And around the building. There were other units involved. One of them was the paratroopers, who were in charge, among other things, of taking over the new terminal, the civilian terminal. There was no fighting expected there, but on the way up, one of the sergeants, Surin Hershko, encountered a Ugandan policeman who immediately shot him with a pistol, shot him in the neck. And he's been really incapacitated ever since. He paid a tremendous price for this operation, but he's not sorry about it. He's a very courageous man, and
it's a tremendous testimony about people sacrificing for other people. And if you want to know more, we've run out of time, very sadly, but if you'd like to know more, then get hold of the book Yoni's Last Battle by Iddo Netanyahu. Thank you so much for joining us today. Don't forget you can email us at info@israelfirst.org if you've got any questions. Visit the website www.israelfirst.org, and remember, we're the program that looks at the land, the people and the language.